Hi YouTube and welcome to my channel. My name is Patrick. Windows 95 came out 30 years ago. 30 years! And I look back on it very fondly because my first computer was running Windows 95. I was just a wee lad back then, but it made a big impression on me. And I owe a lot to Windows 95 because it's what sparked my interest in computers, which I've now made a career out of. So let's step back in time, look at Windows 95, and really understand how it defined decades of the computer environment. So let's dig right in.
Hot now. I mean, it is the platform around the world, yet when it first came out in '85, it took 5 years before anybody paid attention to it. Why?
So Windows 95 might be the most important version of Windows that ever came out. It was a fresh take on the desktop metaphor. See, the version of Windows before 95 was 3.11, and Windows 3.1 was, in retrospect, very rudimentary. It was not very user-friendly, and it was basically just a graphical shell on top of DOS. And we'll touch on the relationship between DOS and Windows 95 later on. But something that Windows 95 introduced was something that we still use today, the Start button.
5 revolves around the Start button. The Start button provides a consolidation of Program Manager, for example, to allow me to easily launch programs by simply selecting the program.
So you launch things out of Start now.
So I don't need to tell you what the Start button is. If you've used Windows in the last 30 years, you're familiar with the Start button and the Start menu. Another thing that Windows 95 brought us that we still have today is the taskbar.
What I can do is I can easily move between documents through the Windows taskbar, which by simply clicking on the button of the window, which is open here on the bottom.
Okay, so the bottom thing, the taskbar, gives you a button for every alive application currently running in Windows.
Exactly.
See, before the taskbar, it was very difficult to manage your running applications because they were just open windows all over the place. And the taskbar really introduced a great way for us to see what exactly is running on our computer and to navigate between and manipulate the windows that we have open. It seems like table stakes today. I mean, almost every desktop has something like the taskbar. Mac OS has the dock. Most Linux distributions have either a dock or a taskbar, much like Windows 95, and it really has become this ubiquitous thing that we don't really think about today, but back in 1995, this was really revolutionary. Windows 95 also ushered in an era of 32-bit programs, which seems archaic today given that everything is 64-bit, but 32-bit programs were a big deal back then. They were faster than 16-bit programs, they had more colors available, they were able to use more memory, and the sophistication of the desktop programs really took a giant leap with Windows 95 thanks to that 32-bit architecture. Also, Windows 95 did something very important, which is enabling protected mode for most of your applications. Now, let me explain this, because a lot of you watching might not remember Windows 95, or maybe you weren't even alive when it came out. Before protected mode, applications would often take memory from other applications. So, if you had 2 applications running, they could try to take the same memory, and then they would crash, which would often cause the operating system to crash as well. Protected mode enabled applications to have their own little sections of designated memory, and to the application, they don't notice anything different. All they know is that they're taking the memory they need. But the operating system is partitioning off your memory in a smart way, dividing it up amongst your different programs. This had a lot of benefits. One thing is that it caused the operating system to stop crashing every time a program crashed, which was a big problem in the Windows 3.1 days. So believe it or not, Windows 95 is still relevant today, and to prove it, all you have to do is look at modern versions of Windows or basically any Linux distribution. So let's talk about the user interface a little bit more. Microsoft Windows 95 had a simple yet elegant user interface. We've already touched on the Start menu and the taskbar, But a few other things that are noteworthy is the control panel in Windows Explorer. This is, Windows Explorer was the replacement for the Files program at Windows 3.11, and Windows Explorer was a huge leap forward as far as navigating through your hard disks. Windows Explorer featured a tree menu on the left-hand side, and then a window on the right-hand side that enabled you to see the contents of the folder that you had selected on the left. Windows Explorer was massively different from the file manager in Windows 3.11. In fact, the file manager in 3.11, it opened a new window for every folder that you opened, and you can pretty easily imagine how messy that would become so very quickly. So Windows 95 set the standard for the desktop metaphor for the next 3 decades. Like I said before, we're still using similar aspects to what we had back in Windows 95 on our computers today. It cannot be overstated how massive of a revolution this was. In fact, the layout of the modern desktop hasn't really changed meaningfully since Windows 95. Alright, so this channel is about cybersecurity, so let's talk about the security of Windows 95, or rather, the lack of. See, Windows 95 came out well before Microsoft took security seriously. It had some new features that really opened up a lot of holes, the biggest being autoplay.
All I have to do is take the CD-ROM that has an autoplay enabled application, put it in the CD-ROM, close it, and even a 4-year-old can now use multimedia. And what will happen is the application will automatically start, and all the user has to do is simply click on it.
So Windows automatically detects you've just inserted a CD-ROM and figures, well, I guess he wanted to launch it, so it launches it.
And it'll do that, or it may help the user.
So with autoplay, anytime you inserted a disk or a flash drive into your computer, it would automatically execute whatever was on that storage medium, which seems very convenient when all you're doing is running legitimate software. However, this opened up a big hole because now all a malicious actor would have to do is get you to plug in something, and then their malware would just execute automatically without any user intervention. It was so bad that autoplay has been basically stripped away in modern versions of Windows. I mean, there's still vestiges of it, but now it asks you what you want to do instead of just opening shit automatically. There were many vulnerabilities in Windows 95. Some of the most egregious include the ability to bypass the password on the lock screen. So here's the scenario. You're logging into your Windows 95 computer and you don't know your password. How do you get in? Well, it's very simple. You hit the escape key and you're in. Like I said, Microsoft was not taking security very seriously back then. And another thing is that Windows 95 was basically a shell on top of DOS. And because of that, many DOS viruses still functioned very well in Windows 95, a true testament to backwards compatibility. Also, there is no built-in update mechanism, so the version of Windows 95 on your computer just was the version that you would have. We get a little bit spoiled today, and I say spoiled, people hate Windows Update, but here's the thing. If you look at what was going on in the past before Windows Update, like with Windows 95, then you'll be thankful for what you've got today, because, like I said, the version of Windows 95 you had on your computer just was the version that was on your computer. If you run into any malicious software that maybe you downloaded online, well, unless you manually go to the Windows Update catalog website and install updates, you're going to be vulnerable to whatever exploit that malicious software is using. So yeah, Windows Update wasn't really a thing, and that's because about half of the population in the United States didn't have internet at this time, and so building in a subsystem to update the operating system over the internet wasn't really realistic. And the people who did have internet back then were using dial-up, and dial-up could easily be saturated by a single download, and so imagine you get an update on your computer and nobody in your house can do anything with the internet until that update finishes. So there's some practical reasons why Windows Update wasn't a thing until much later, but it's still a vulnerability that was exploited quite often. Also, antivirus. Antiviruses in 1995 were a different breed. See, the thing about it is that there was no default antivirus on Windows 95. And that was a big problem. We didn't see a built-in antivirus until halfway through Windows 7's lifespan. And the antiviruses that did exist in 1995 were very rudimentary. So, for example, Norton Antivirus, almost all of its detection capabilities were signature-based, meaning that if a new piece of malware came out or a new virus, then you would have to have updated your Norton antivirus utility first before it could stop those viruses. And remember, we're talking about dial-up connections here. So let's say your antivirus decides to update, now nobody in your house can use the internet until it's done. So you can imagine how frequently antivirus systems got updates back then. So Windows 95 wasn't a step backwards in security, but it wasn't a step forwards either. See, Windows 95 security was just not something Microsoft was worried about. So let's talk about the impact Windows 95 had on Microsoft. So when Windows 95 came out, Microsoft is already a massive company, but Windows 95 really cemented them as a titan in the computing industry. See, the competition back then was a lot more colorful than it is today. You had stuff like OS/2 Warp by IBM, you had obviously Mac OS, and you had stuff like BOS. Here's the thing, the competition, right? Mac OS hadn't really meaningfully changed since it came out. Remember, we're talking about OS 6. OS 6 was not a great release of Mac OS, and if you're interested in hearing more about that, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to look at some ancient Mac OS systems for you. And then OS/2 Warp. OS/2 was marketed by IBM as being a better DOS than DOS, and a better Windows than Windows. It could run DOS programs, it could run Windows programs. What they didn't expect was that Microsoft would jump ahead by years in their user interface design, and most programs were Windows compatible at this point, and so there really wasn't a reason to have to run OS/2. There was no killer app for it. And then BOS. BOS is an interesting one because it should have gotten big. BOS was a wonderful piece of software. However, as fate would have it, BOS would never see the light of day in the mainstream media, and all we have left of its vestiges is the Haiku operating system. And again, if you're interested in learning about Haiku, leave me a comment down below and we'll take a look at it. So Microsoft's marketing campaign for Windows 95 was probably the most effective in computer history. They licensed the famous song Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones. They had actors who were stars in the TV show Friends come on to do a products demonstration. They even had Jay Leno talk at the launch party for Windows 95. It was a big deal, and it was a big deal because it really was a quantum leap forward in computer interface design. So people who learned how to use computers with Windows 95 were able to take those skills with them throughout the next 30 years, because when you look at it, Windows 95 was not very meaningfully different from Windows 10. I mean, let's look at them side by side. Here's Windows 95, and here's Windows 10. I mean, the similarities are striking, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So Windows 95 was a massive change in the computing world. Its impact has been felt for the last 30 years. Interface design has mirrored Windows 95 all of these years. And now if you try to use Windows 95 today, you have to find an era-accurate computer to do it, because Windows 95 is very difficult to virtualize, and obviously it's not going to run on any modern hardware. So if you want to use Windows 95, your best bet is to get an era-appropriate computer, and do it soon, because these things are turning into collector's items, and the price on them is going way up, and the longer you wait, the more you're going to pay. But yeah, Windows 95, just an amazing piece of software, just really moved us forward by so much. It was my first operating system, and it shaped the way that I felt about computers for the next 3 decades. And further, it really was a life-changing piece of software for me. I wouldn't be into computers like I am today if it weren't for Windows 95 back then. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my video about Windows 95. I appreciate you watching. If you enjoy this type of content, or you want to learn more about cybersecurity, consider subscribing to my channel down below. If you have if I missed something or if I got something wrong, leave me a comment. I'm going to pin a comment at the top that's a list of corrections that I received in the comments section. And yeah, thank you for watching. Catch you in the next one.